Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. It's time to take your questions, and the first one is coming from Andrew on Patreon. And he asks, to what extent can the federal government work to ensure that the provinces are living up to their responsibilities under the Canada Health Act and or ensuring our publicly funded universal system is delivering for Canadians? Why has accountability not been sufficiently placed at the feet of provincial governments? Okay, so on the first part, the Canada Health Act only deals with certain things, and a lot of that has to do with the public provision. So when the federal government has any issues under the Canada Health Act, it's generally around things like fees being charged at clinics, service fees, anything like that. And what ends up happening is they take that data and then they claw back an amount from the federal transfer equal to the amount of fees that were charged, and that is supposed to entice the province to make sure that those fees are eliminated. That happens every now and again. And sometimes it doesn't happen in a very good way, such as there was a case a few years ago where there was a private abortion clinic opened in New Brunswick because the province would not fund those services in that part of the province. So they charged for certain of those procedures. The federal government then clawed back from the provincial transfer an amount related or equal to those fees that were charged, in the hopes of getting the province to change their mind on it. It ended up not happening, and even worse was the fact that when the pandemic happened, the federal government just reversed that clawback. So the province suffered no penalty at all in that case because the federal government didn't want to look like the bad guy rather than like they were standing up for their feminist principles. So there you go. So that's kind of what happens with the Canada Health Act. It's mostly just around things like the public provision and service fees. In terms of other forms of accountability, that is a very good question. I wish I had a better answer other than public pressure needs to be held to the premiers, and some of that needs to come from the media, and the media doesn't like to do that because they like to make everything a federal story. I wish I had a good reason why, other than the federal stories are sexier, they get more attention, and federal bureaus may have more resources than some of the provincial ones. So the stories tend to gravitate toward the federal, even though the federal government doesn't really have a lot of strings that they can pull. They have been trying with these latest transfer agreements, which are supposed to be built around action plans that the province will then submit, that says, here's what we are going to use this money for, and it has to do with hiring a certain number of doctors and nurses and making certain kinds of other changes, and they've also folded in the mental health transfer with that as well, so that they have, as part of that action plan, the resource, the dedicated aspect toward mental health, because the previous mental health transfer negotiated by Jane Philpott did not get used for mental health by the provinces, as the federal government found out. So therefore, that's what they're trying to do, to build in a little more accountability, so that if provinces don't demonstrate that they spent that money on those things, then the federal government will be less likely to send them another tranche of money in 2 years or whatever the period for those action plans is. So that's one way that they're trying to build in some accountability, but most of the accountability needs to come from public pressure. That needs to come in part from media, because that's where people learn about what's going on. And we have a problem in this country in that media does not like to hold premiers to account for almost anything. Education a little bit, because you can't make that a federal issue, but for the most part, they tend to try and make everything a federal issue, and then we wind up in situations like this. And I wish I had a better way to yeah, a better answer in terms of what we can concretely do, but it's mostly just keep up pressure on the premiers and the provinces. And we need to do that kind of from a grassroots level, and letting, we, the public, letting the provincial governments know that we don't want to stand for what they've been doing with healthcare over the last number of decades, and it needs to change. But that's got to be public pressure that may be difficult to mobilize at a time like this. Our other question this week comes from Peter Hickman on Twitter, who asks, why doesn't Polyev have security clearance, and what's the truth about his wife's family in jail in Venezuela? Okay, so I keep answering this question. Polyev has a security clearance. He had one when he was a minister of the Crown. He is a member of Privy Council. He can see whatever secret documents he wants to see. He chooses not to see them because it's easier for him to be a loudmouth and to say anything he wants if he does not see the documents. This is a long-standing problem in Canadian politics. Our MPs prefer to be ignorant critics rather than informed observers. There's plenty of academic material on this, and I'd encourage you to go check it out. But this is a choice that Polyev made. It's not that he can't get clearance. It's not that he, is refused clearance. It's not that. He's got it. He chooses not to use it because it's easier for him to say anything he wants if he does not see the materials. That's why he doesn't do it. As for his wife, I keep hearing this stuff about her family is in jail in Venezuela. I've seen absolutely no evidence of that. Any credible reporting shows that they immigrated to Montreal. Her father, who was a banker there, started collecting fruits and vegetables as a job when he moved to Quebec, and eventually opened a small business. I've seen absolutely nothing to substantiate that any of her family are in jail in Venezuela. So I don't know where this rumor comes from. But there's nothing official that I can find out there. And we should probably stop listening to internet rumors. And that's everything for this week. Thanks for your questions. Don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter, and journodale no_ on Bluesky. And we'll see you next week for some more Canadian politics. Thanks, everyone.